Not being afraid to die in the sense that I experience it has nothing to do with being reckless with your health and your sense of being. It has more to do with living with total and absolute dignity and sovereignty, meaning that you stand firm on your own terms and do not negotiate the self-respect that you have for any reasons. It starts with you living a noble life, meaning that I apply this acronym LUCK: love, understanding, compassion, and kindness. And you don't need to focus on any one of those exclusively or at the same time. There's always going to be a flow of how they operate. And when I talk about love, I'm not specifically talking about romantic love or a deep affectionate concern for an individual, although that's included. What I mean is more like agape or brotherly love in general. But it includes understanding and compassion, which, however, are not always kind. What it means is that you operate with your best interest in mind and understand that it has nothing to do with taking away from anyone else. That you can operate as if, because there may be evidence to support this, but you operate as if resources in the world, because in our universe they virtually are, unlimited. And when you do so, living in this noble way, that you are operating with your best interest in mind, meaning that you are working towards your worthy ideal, a progressive realization of your worthy ideal or worthy ideals. I suggest there be more than one. For example, I have a focus on metaphysics, which includes the study and research of science, philosophy, and spirituality, and the writing of lyrics, the composing of music, the performing and recording of music, of dance, and the training in martial arts. And becoming successful in those means that I remain open-minded. I'm continually learning more and new ways to do what it is I do. And to find ways that as I continue to improve, because these are things that I'm passionate about, that I enjoy doing, and as I continue to improve these things, I look for ways that I can offer them to the public, meaning publish them, make it known to others, in a way that will also help to support their personal development and inspire them, to motivate them to take on and engage consistently in a practice, in the process of self-development for themselves. And it could be the same thing. It could be science, spirituality, philosophy, the arts, including music, and physical fitness, including martial arts. It could be those things and many more. And while, again, you're pursuing these worthy ideals to the highest and greatest extent that you could possibly get to mastering and perfecting them, while being certain that these are your desires, but it's not a purely selfish desire. That knowing that the better you become at certain things, inevitably, as I have in my experience known and continue to know, that people will be drawn to you. And so if you're truly living in this way, you really owe nothing to anyone, but through your gratitude that you are able to continue moving forward as you do, you are simply already overflowing, and you're just letting that and directing that excess be directed and guided towards others. And as I said, in publishing, really just meaning to make public, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to record it or write it down or take a picture of it or a video of it and post it online or in some other library or archive. But making something public simply could be going on tour and speaking live in front of people, like in the same way that a stand-up comic or a public speaker would stand up and speak to people. That's publishing, by making it public. And sometimes the publishing that you do is a one-off, and people will hear it and it will live on in their memory even if it never gets recorded or written down. Publishing comes in many forms. Nowadays it's so easy to publish things online, or at least there's a lot less friction than there used to be to get in front of so many people. And this also elicits the understanding I am talking about. It invokes the need for being bold, for being brave, for being courageous, for being confident. In other words, as I've been saying, without fear, fearless. Because many people have reservations due to all kinds of deep running insecurities around excommunication and ostracization and rejection and the embarrassment and loneliness that comes from people who might have some kind of opinion about what you do, about what you say, about how you make yourself public. And so, because of that, you might, and I'm encouraging you to get rid of this, might cease to act, to initiate, to start in the first place. And I encourage you to do so anyway. Because the perspective that I'm offering is that if you have made any acquaintances or any friends and associates in this world, and you are just simply being who you are, and you're learning and becoming better, I mean, you have basic manners and courtesy and things like that, and you're honest, and you're straightforward with people, and you don't have to talk all the time, and you don't have to communicate everything all the time, but you're living that life where you're not doing anything to impose upon others or take anything away from them. And if you being you has resulted in you making associates, acquaintances, and friends, then by you being yourself and making that public, and maybe even disseminating it far and wide, even through and on this online, internet, interconnected social media atmosphere, what you are doing is simply amplifying who you are. And so that people who may not be local to you can then, through a parasocial means online, get to know, like, and trust you, as do the people who are in your local vicinity. Because all you're simply doing is documenting your existence by being who you are. As I said, there's no need to contrive anything. You operate as you are, simply document it, publish that, and you'll find your tribe that way. In the same way that people are drawn to you and know you from being around you. And I'm not certain where all the different forms of fear come from, or these ridiculous ideas about imposter syndrome. But when you truly know something, when you really practice, when you are really deep in the journey towards mastery that will never end, this perpetual journey, this ongoing adventure in life, it seems to me, from my experience, that confidence simply compounds and builds and magnifies and becomes amplified within you, even exponentially rather than linearly, as time goes on, as long as you are persistent. And what is fear? It's attached to something perhaps ancient, and something that we as people in general haven't learned to process it for what it is originally. As we're born with these fears of falling and loud noises for our survival, to be aware of things when we feel pain, to know that something is wrong. But to then internalize that in such a way that we fear things that are unknown is a disservice to yourself. It limits you. It hinders you. You do a disservice to yourself by fearing the unknown, which it seems that almost all fear is, and it's deeply rooted in ancient, illogical, irrational superstition about eternal punishments and damnations. And the understanding that being ostracized and excommunicated and rejected has a lot of similarities with physical pain, which, however, can also be mastered. There are tortures and procedures and punishments that can cause a person to cry and scream out even though they don't wish to do so. There are chemicals, there are things that we know medically these days that can cause people to do certain things. The amount of data we have on the brain and the nervous system and about chemistry and biology and physics and what can be done to people, the horrors, the tortures, the evils that human beings do. But that has nothing to do with your decision to maintain your dignity, to no matter what happens in your life, that you train, that you study, that you practice, that you continue to be the best that you possibly can be, ongoing, ad infinitum, forever, never ever stopping, always going forward. Not in a hectic, hustling, burning yourself out type of way, but in a calm, clear-headed, diligent, intelligent, efficient manner, making the best use of your time for you, wasting nothing, knowing when to go hard, knowing when to rest, understanding when to push, when to pull, when to be neutral, knowing your limits and pushing past them so that you have new limits and new boundaries, and then resting and then going and pushing against them again. Understanding that most limitations are self-imposed, and there's so much capacity and potential that we as human beings have, far beyond most of what we are offered by way of most of the media and the publications that we can get our hands on, and the various different teachers and gurus and authorities out there. What is mostly happening is a culture of mediocrity, of conformity, almost as if it's deception, potentially omitting that which contributes to the overall greatness of the many. And part of that subjugation is the perpetuation of the necessity for fear. When you actually understand fear, you understand, when you comprehend that it is actually quite useless after a certain point. The original fears of falling and loud noises that we're born with are there in order to instruct us in self-preservation, which is necessary for us to continue having life experience. Because we are adventurous and explorative beings. And we derive great pleasure from building and working and creating. And our bodies are vessels, much like a spaceship. More like the spaceships that you know from science fiction, right? These intergalactic, interplanetary vessels. To explore far-off worlds. And right now we're on mission here on Earth. And these vessels that we get about in, these are the equivalent to our spacesuits, right? To do extra vehicular activities, right? The spacewalks, to get out and in this environment. And in our cars and planes and everything, these are the rovers, these are the things, we're all exploring this planet and all that this physical reality and this physical three-dimensional human life has to offer. And in order to do that, we have to maintain and elevate the state of our physical being, optimizing our health and well-being, so that our perceptions can be as pure and clean and able as possible, without being hindered or held back by obstructions unnecessarily. The world that we're in poses enough challenge as it is, without us unnecessarily piling on extra things. We have the laws of physics to deal with, and the various different physical necessities and the management of our biological systems and our communication and interactions. There's so many things already that pose challenges that it crosses into absurd realms of understanding that we would diminish our self-awareness to the point that this lack of understanding is detrimental to our exploration and adventure. It's ridiculous. Yet somehow there are various factions in this world. Small in number, but effective because their lineage is ancient. And from their perspective, which could be considered psychotic, sociopathic, narcissistic, and evil, from that perspective, there's no incentive to release their grip on humanity. No incentive whatsoever. And all of it is presented in such a way that these things are just how life is supposed to be. And normal and mediocre and regular and basic and fitting in and conforming and going along with being part of, joining, are made to feel more comfortable, especially when those things have to do with what supports the minority's agenda of control. A control that once again is managed by fear. And when you find that fear is not an absolute reality, it's a small part of experience. And to use the spaceship analogy, maybe a rocket from Earth, it's like those booster rockets that get it out into orbit and then they fall off. They're therefore, the fear that we feel originally in our early formative years is necessary for a short time and then must be discarded. Or more accurately, must be transmuted. It must be understood from a different perspective so that it no longer is this illogical, irrational, hysterical type of panic, but instead the sensation is seen to be something that can be leveraged and applied to intelligent and aware and responsive instead of reactive self-preservation for our continued exploration of this physical reality. As I began in the opening of this dissertation, that fearlessness does not mean one is to be reckless with their health and their well-being. Because that would defeat the purpose of having a life. This opportunity we have for potentially limitless exploration. The potential limitlessness comes from the fact that we don't just have a physical awareness when we are so-called awake, but we can be lucid dreamers. We can use our minds and our thoughts even when a part of our consciousness seems to go offline and into another realm, into another part of reality. We don't always know exactly what this is, but there are definite experiences, memories, and things that go beyond when we think that we are awake to the world. And even in that place, because it's a biological part of us that many have not learned to control, to make it obey them, many have fear in their dreams, in their sleep. We call them nightmares. And these are just remnants of that control system that has taken advantage and leveraged this simply by removing the instruction, the education, and the guidance that would accompany our development, our maturity. And so many remain as frightened children because of the removal of this much needed direction. It is quite a different existence to live without fear. And it's even better stated to live with confidence, to live courageously. To live boldly, to live deliberately and intentionally and on your own terms. Fear is not an entirely real experience that must be perpetuated throughout even a human's short lifespan. It is a manipulative construct that we can take control of. And it will serve us when we force it to submit to our will rather than unconsciously being pushed to and fro by it whenever something unexpected or whenever we encounter the unknown. We may have our bodies beaten and broken. The armies that we fight alongside with may all be annihilated. However, even in our downfall, one thing that we can ultimately preserve is our sovereignty and our dignity. I am Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.